The blizzard that hit the interstate wasn't weather. It was a white wall, a zero-visibility freeze that swallowed cars and timelines whole. By 8 p.m., state police had closed every road for 200 miles, and in the cab of his pickup, buried to the doors in a drift, a single father was running out of heat, out of food, and out of options. He had no idea the woman he was about to let into his truck, the stranger begging for shelter for her and her shivering child, was lying about everything. Except how cold she was. His name was Jake Mitchell, a contractor just trying to get back to his 6-year-old son before the state froze solid. Her name, she said, was Sarah, and her story about a broken-down car and a missing husband was just convincing enough to sound true. What happened in that truck over the next 10 hours was a simple story of human kindness. What happened at dawn would rewrite the story completely and force everyone to ask one terrifying question. What do you do when the person you saved is the last person you were ever supposed to meet? Jake's world had shrunk to the foggy interior of his Ford F-150, the groan of the wind, and the ticking clock of his gasoline gauge. He'd been on his way back from a remote job site when the storm upgraded from a warning to a siege. The state's emergency alert had buzzed on his phone too late, already reading "Seek shelter immediately." He tried. He'd taken an exit, aiming for a small town his map promised was 5 miles ahead. He only made it 2. The plows had surrendered, leaving a single lane that vanished into a white void. His truck slid softly, then decisively, into the deep drift on the shoulder, and that was that. He was 37 years old, a man who solved problems with his hands, and for the first time in years, his hands were useless. The woman, Sarah, had emerged from that void an hour later, a shape stumbling toward his taillights, barely visible, a bundle in her arms. His first thought was disbelief. His second was a cold spear of fear for the child she carried. He'd unlocked the doors before he'd fully processed the risk. She was freezing, the kind of cold that goes deep, past shivering into a dangerous stillness. Her coat was expensive, a long, tailored wool thing utterly useless against a Great Lakes blizzard. The child, a little girl of about 4, was wrapped in a blanket, but her cheeks were flushed too bright. Hypothermia setting in. Jake moved on instinct. He cranked the engine, running it for 10-minute bursts to conserve fuel, and directed the pathetic stream of heat toward them. He pulled his spare winter gear from a duffel behind the seat, a thick fleece-lined flannel for Sarah, an old sweater he used as a shop coat that he carefully wrapped around the little girl. He offered his last thermos of lukewarm chicken soup, the last of his granola bars. Sarah's story was simple, desperate, and flawed. Her SUV had stalled a mile back. Her husband had gone for help on foot and hadn't returned. She grabbed their daughter and followed his footprints until the wind scoured them away. She gave a name, Michael. She gave a make of car, a black Toyota Highlander. She spoke with the clipped, controlled panic of someone holding terror at bay for the sake of the child. But her eyes, when they flicked to the darkness outside, held a calculation that didn't match the story. And she never once asked him to try calling her husband. She just kept saying, "We just need to wait until morning." As the night deepened, the true economy of the situation took hold. Jake had half a tank of gas. Running the engine for heat, they could last maybe until dawn if the storm eased. If it didn't, the calculus turned deadly. He checked his phone every 20 minutes, no signal, just a mocking SOS only in the corner. He thought of his son, Ben, safe with his sister. He'd called just before the signal died, heard the cheerful chaos of his sister's house in the background. "Love you, buddy. I'll be there soon." The memory sat in his chest like a stone. The little girl who whispered her name was Chloe fell into a fitful sleep. Sarah, however, didn't sleep. She watched the storm, she watched Jake, her fingers constantly checking the pocket of her coat. Once, when she thought he was dozing, he saw her pull out a small, sleek phone, different from the one she'd claimed was dead, in her purse. She looked at its black screen, a flicker of profound frustration crossing her face, and shoved it back deep into her pocket. Jake didn't confront her. In a stranded vehicle, trust is a fragile, necessary fiction. Instead, he talked. He talked about Ben, about building treehouses, about the stubbornness of old plumbing. It was a tactic, a way to keep them both present, to stave off the cold silence where fear grows. She offered little in return, just polite, hollow responses. Her attention was elsewhere, her ear tuned to a frequency he couldn't hear. Around 3 a.m., the wind reached a new pitch, a screaming vibrato that shook the truck on its springs. The snow was no longer falling, It was being fired horizontally. In a lull, Jake saw the truth. They were buried. The driver's side window was a wall of solid white. The world beyond no longer existed. The carbon monoxide risk from the tailpipe being blocked was now as real a threat as the cold. He had to clear it. He told Sarah to keep the engine off no matter what, bundled himself in every layer he had left, and pushed the door open against the weight of the drift. The cold was an physical assault. It stole his breath and needled through his clothes in seconds. He fought his way around the truck with his hands, digging frantically at the tailpipe until his fingers went numb, clearing a small airway. He stumbled back inside, bringing a whirlwind of snow with him, his face burning with cold. Sarah was staring at him, her composure cracked. For a second, he saw raw, unguarded fear. "You could have died out there," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," he gasped, his teeth chattering. "We all could." That shared, unspoken truth hung between them for the rest of the night. The pretense of her story faded away, replaced by a grim, cooperative silence. They took turns dozing, always one of them awake to monitor Chloe, to listen for the impossible sound of a plow, to run the engine for 12 precious minutes every hour. Jake's phone, sitting on the dash, remained a dead black slab. The first grey light of dawn was not a relief. It revealed the scale of their tomb. The truck was a cocoon in a seamless white desert, no landmarks, no road, just endless, drifting waves of snow. But the wind had dropped from a scream to a moan. The storm was passing. Jake tried the engine. It turned over, groaned, but the wheels spun uselessly. They were stuck, but they were alive. He had maybe 2 hours of fuel left. The new danger was time. As the sky lightened to a pale, metallic gray, a new sound cut through the silence. Not a plow, not a car. It was a low, powerful rumble growing closer. Multiple engines. Sarah's head snapped up. The color drained from her face, but it wasn't fear this time. It was something else. Dread, resignation, a profound fatigue. She pulled Chloe closer, burying the girl's face in her coat. Jake squinted through the cleared patch on the windshield. Over the crest of the snowdrift that buried the road, shapes emerged. Not rescue vehicles, not salt trucks. Dark, boxy Suburbans with blacked-out windows, 2 of them. They moved with authoritative purpose, carving a new path through the deep snow directly toward his stranded truck. They weren't searching, they were arriving. The lead Suburban pulled up 20 feet away, its powerful engine idling. The doors opened, not EMTs, not sheriff's deputies, men in dark suits and heavy parkas, their postures rigid, their eyes scanning the white expanse before landing squarely on Jake's truck, on the passenger side. One of them, a man with a coiled earpiece wire visible at his temple, began trudging purposefully through the snow toward Jake's door. Jake's mind raced, trying to slot the scene into a logic that fit. FBI, disaster response. He turned to Sarah, a question on his lips, but the words died. She was already looking at him, her expression now clear, calm, and unbearably sad. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. Outside, the man in the suit reached the truck. He didn't try the door. He simply bent down, made eye contact with Jake through the glass, and then his gaze shifted past him to Sarah. He gave a single, slight nod. And then Jake saw it. On the grille of the idling Suburban, barely visible through the blowing snow, not a company logo, a small official seal, the seal of the state. The man in the suit rapped his knuckles twice on the driver's side window, a sharp, official sound that cut through the last of the storm's silence. Jake, his mind still grappling with the state seal, numbly hit the unlock button. The door was wrenched open from outside, letting in a blast of frozen air and the presence of sheer, overwhelming authority. "Sir, step out of the vehicle, please. Keep your hands where I can see them." The agent's voice was calm, flat, and left no room for discussion. It was the voice of controlled crisis. Jake complied, his muscles stiff and protesting, stumbling into the knee-deep snow. A second agent was already at the passenger door, opening it, his posture softening only a fraction. "Ma'am, are you or your daughter injured?" Sarah, or whatever her name was, shook her head, gathering Chloe closer. "We are cold, we're okay." Her voice had changed. The fearful, stranded mother was gone, replaced by a tone of weary, formal relief. She accepted the agent's hand to step down, clutching her daughter. Jake watched, feeling like a spectator in his own disaster. The lead agent, who introduced himself as Agent Miller, State Protective Services, turned his full attention to Jake. "Your name, sir?" Jake Mitchell." "Can you explain your presence here with the First Lady, Mr. Mitchell?" The term hit Jake like a physical blow. First Lady, the words didn't fit. They belonged to news clips and ribbon cuttings, not to the exhausted woman who'd shared his last granola bar. He stared past the agent at Sarah. She met his gaze, and in her eyes was a profound, silent apology. "She was stranded," Jake heard himself say, his voice rough. "I found her walking. The child was freezing. I let them into my truck. We waited out the night." The simplicity of the truth sounded ludicrous. Agent Miller's expression didn't change, but his eyes were recording every detail: Jake's work clothes, the empty thermos in the cup holder, the discarded granola bar wrapper. He asked a series of rapid, precise questions: time of encounter, her condition, what was said. Jake answered mechanically, the surreal nature of the situation wrapping around him. He was being debriefed about a sleepover. Meanwhile, a flurry of professional activity unfolded around the other Suburban. A female agent had produced a thick thermal blanket and was wrapping Chloe, speaking to her in a gentle, practiced tone. Another was on a satellite phone, speaking in low, urgent codes. "Package is secure. Repeat, package is secure. One civilian involved. Proceed to secondary extraction point." Sarah stood apart, allowing herself to be checked over, but her attention was fixed on Jake. When the initial barrage of questions paused, she spoke, her voice clear in the cold air. "Agent Miller, this man saved our lives. He shared his food, his heat, and his vehicle at significant personal risk. He is to be treated with respect and gratitude. Is that understood?" It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. The governor's wife, the First Lady, the pieces finally, horrifyingly clicked into place. The expensive coat, the secret phone, the calculation in her eyes. She wasn't just hiding from the storm, she was hiding from them. Miller gave a tight nod. "Understood, ma'am." His demeanor toward Jake shifted a degree from interrogator to witness. "We'll need a full statement, Mr. Mitchell, for security and for the incident report. You'll ride with us." They wouldn't let him back into his truck. His keys were taken, his vehicle declared part of an active security scene. A tow would come later, they said. He was ushered into the back of the second Suburban, a plush, silent capsule that smelled of clean leather and electronics. Through the tinted window, he watched as Sarah and Chloe were helped into the lead vehicle. Before the door closed, Sarah looked back directly at his window. She mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." The convoy carved its way back to a plowed county road, and from there to a small, frantic command post set up in the parking lot of a shuttered roadside diner. There were more black vehicles, state police cruisers, and an ambulance with its lights silently spinning. The world had suddenly become very loud, very bright, and full of strangers in uniforms. Jake was taken to a heated tent, given a foil blanket and a cup of terrible coffee by a nervous-looking aide. He gave his statement again, this time to a stone-faced state police detective who typed everything into a laptop. The questions were deeper now. Did she seem coerced? Did she mention anyone following her? Did she express fear of anyone specific? The fake story about the husband, Michael, took on a new, sinister weight. They were probing for a threat, a kidnapping scenario. Jake could only tell them the facts as he knew them. She was lying, but she was afraid, and her primary concern was the child. Through the tent flap, he caught glimpses of the other stage of this drama. Sarah, now with a coat that bore a state insignia, was speaking calmly to a cluster of high-ranking officials. A medic was checking Chloe's ears and fingers for frostbite. The scene was one of controlled, efficient recovery, a problem being solved. An hour later, a different man entered Jake's tent. He was older, wearing a crisp overcoat instead of a tactical parka, with the weary, intelligent eyes of someone who managed chaos for a living. He introduced himself as Paul Dryden, Chief of Staff for the Governor's Office. "Mr. Mitchell, on behalf of the Governor and the people of this state, I want to express our deepest gratitude," Dryden began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your actions were nothing short of heroic." It was a speech, a good one but a speech. Jake just waited. Dryden's tone shifted, becoming more confidential. The situation is, as you can imagine, extremely sensitive. The First Lady, Elena, had taken her daughter to a private family residence yesterday afternoon. When communications were lost due to the storm and her security detail was unable to reach the location due to road closures, we activated our missing persons protocol. The discovery that she was not at the residence, but rather traveling, has created a significant internal situation. Elena, her name was Elena, not Sarah. Jake filed that away, a small, sharp piece of the real story. We are conducting a full internal review, Dryden continued. For now, the official statement will focus on the weather emergency, a vehicle failure, and a fortunate encounter with a Good Samaritan, which is the truth. We will need your cooperation in maintaining that narrative. What about the story she told me, Jake asked, about her husband going for help? Dryden's expression didn't flicker. The First Lady was disoriented and suffering from extreme cold. She was not in her right mind. We're just thankful you saw through her distress and offered aid. It was a clean, professional lie. They were erasing her lie and replacing it with a more convenient one. They were also, Jake realized, offering him a shield. To question their story would be to question the governor's wife's sanity or to accuse her of something worse. He was being handed the Good Samaritan script and strongly encouraged to read it. Before he could respond, a flurry of activity outside drew Dryden's attention. Through the tent opening, Jake saw a new car arrive, a dark sedan. A man got out tall with silvering hair, his face drawn with a tension that no amount of authority could mask. He was immediately surrounded by agents and aides, but his gaze swept past them, searching until it landed on the tent where Elena and Chloe were. Governor William Thorne had arrived. Jake watched as the governor strode toward his family. He saw Elena look up, her body language closing in on itself. He saw the governor reach her, place his hands on her shoulders, his head bending to hers in what the press would call a loving, worried reunion. But from this distance, Jake saw the stiffness in Elena's posture. He saw the way the governor's grip looked less like comfort and more like control. He saw the brief, almost imperceptible flinch as he pulled her into a public embrace. Dryden followed Jake's gaze, a faint frown line appearing between his brows. The governor is, of course, profoundly relieved, he said, a little too quickly. At that moment, as the governor turned, speaking to an aide and pointing back toward the command post, his eyes scanned the area and landed on Jake's tent. On Jake, the governor's expression was complex, gratitude warring with intense scrutiny and something else. A cold, assessing calculation. He gave a short, firm nod in Jake's direction, a statesman's acknowledgement, then turned back, his arm firmly around his wife, guiding her toward the waiting sedan. Dryden's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his mouth tightening. The press pool has been activated. They're 30 minutes out. He turned back to Jake, his professional mask fully back in place. Mr. Mitchell, we'll have an officer drive you home. A public affairs officer will contact you later today regarding the statement. We appreciate your discretion. Your truck will be delivered to you once the scene is processed. It was a dismissal. The crisis was being packaged, and the civilian was being ushered off stage. Jake was driven home in the back of a state police cruiser, a silent officer at the wheel. He walked into his sister's house to the overwhelming relief of his son Ben, the frantic questions of his sister. He gave them the simplified version. He'd gotten stuck. He'd helped some people. The state police had helped him out. He couldn't bring himself to say the truth. It felt too dangerous, too unreal. But the real world was already intruding. By early afternoon, the local news carried the breaking story. First Lady and daughter safe after harrowing blizzard ordeal. The footage showed the governor standing at a podium, his voice thick with emotion, thanking the brave individual who provided shelter, emphasizing the miracle of citizen kindness in a time of crisis. Jake's name wasn't used. He was the Good Samaritan, a faceless hero in the state's narrative. On his kitchen table, his phone, finally charged, buzzed with a notification, then another, and another. Friend requests from people he hadn't spoken to in years, messages from local reporters, a voicemail from a producer at a national morning show. The carefully managed press release had done its job, but it had also cast a net. His anonymity was crumbling by the minute. As he sat there watching his son play on the floor, The image that haunted him wasn't the storm or the government vehicles. It was the look on Alina's face in that final moment before the car door closed. Not gratitude, not relief. It was resignation, and it was fear. The official story was a perfect, airtight shell, but inside it, Jake knew, was a different, more troubling truth. He had kept 2 people alive through a deadly night. And now, in the clear light of day, he couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that the woman he saved might still be in profound danger. Not from the cold, but from the very life he'd returned her to. The first knock on his door wasn't from a reporter. It was from a man in a dark overcoat 2 days after the storm, just after Jake had put his son on the school bus. It was Paul Dryden, the governor's chief of staff, standing on his front porch with a thin, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. He declined coffee. He got straight to the point. "We need to discuss your continued cooperation, Mr. Mitchell. The narrative is fragile. Any deviation, any additional detail could be misconstrued. It could harm the First Lady's recovery. It could, frankly, harm you." It was dressed as concern. It felt like a threat. Dryden laid out the understanding. Jake would grant one carefully managed interview to a hand-picked local reporter, telling the simple Good Samaritan story. He would decline all other media requests, citing a desire for privacy. In return, the governor's office would express its eternal gratitude, a phrase which, Dryden implied, could have tangible benefits, a potential contracting recommendation for state projects, a discreet financial token for his trouble and lost wages. Jake felt a slow burn of anger. They were trying to buy his silence and wrap it in a ribbon of official thanks. He thought of Alina's resigned fear. "What if I have more to say?" he asked. Dryden's smile vanished. "Then you would be choosing to publicly contradict a traumatized woman and the official account of the state's law enforcement. You would be dragging a 4-year-old child back into the spotlight. The media would turn on you, Mr. Mitchell. They would dig. They would find things. Everyone has things." He let the words hang in the quiet living room. "The grateful hero is a good role. I'd advise you to keep it." After Dryden left, the pressure campaign began in earnest. A friendly local news piece aired, calling Jake a hometown hero. The comments online were a mix of praise and immediate, ugly suspicion. Why was he out in that storm? Bet he's getting a big payoff. Something's off about this. His social media was flooded. Then the phone calls started. Not just media, but strangers. Some supportive, some vicious, some just breathing heavily before hanging up. His boss at the contracting company called him into the office. He was sympathetic but firm. "Jake, the phone hasn't stopped. Its clients worried about disruption. Its reporters asking for quotes in the middle of job sites. The Thorne administration is a huge potential client for us. This is all just a lot. Why don't you take a paid leave for a couple weeks? Let this blow over." He was being sidelined. The world was tightening around him, shaping him into the silent, grateful statue they needed him to be. He tried to comply. He gave the one sanctioned interview, sticking to the script. He smiled tightly and said he was just glad to help. Inside, he felt like a coward. The breaking point came a week later, from an unexpected direction. A plain envelope arrived in his mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single, grainy photocopied page. It was a partially redacted incident report from the State Protective Services, dated 6 months earlier. The subject line read, "Welfare check, residence of Governor W. Thorne." The narrative described a call from a concerned neighbor about a domestic disturbance. Units responded. The First Lady was described as visibly upset, but denying any issue. The governor was cooperative and states it was a heated policy discussion. The report was closed with the notation, "No further action. Situation appears stable." But handwritten in the margin, in different ink, was a note. Subject ET presented with bruising on upper arm, consistent with grab marks. Declined medical. Detail advised to increase perimeter checks. Jake's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a document. Someone inside the machine had seen something, written it down, and now, for reasons he couldn't fathom, had sent it to him. This was the something worse. Alina wasn't just unhappy, she was being hurt, and the system designed to protect her was covering it up. He didn't know who to trust. The police. The report came from state agents. The media. They were being fed the official fairy tale. He thought of the detective who took his statement, the stone-faced woman. He looked up her name, Detective Valerie Cruz, State Police Major Crimes. It was a desperate, probably stupid move, but he had to try. He met her at a diner 20 miles from his town, in a corner booth. He slid the photocopied report across the table. She read it, her expression not changing, but her knuckles whitened where she held the paper. She pushed it back to him. "Where did you get this?" "Anonymous mail. This is a leaked internal document. Possessing it is problematic." "Is it true?" She was silent for a long time, stirring her coffee. "Mr. Mitchell," she finally said, her voice low, "the Thorne administration is a fortress. Protective services, the detail, they report through the governor's office, not through us. Our jurisdiction ends at the mansion gate, unless we're invited in. That report, it was never in our system. Someone risked a lot to copy it." "So what do I do?" "You do nothing," she said, looking directly at him. "You are a small rock thrown at a very thick window. You will accomplish nothing and you will get hurt. Your son will get hurt. The system you want to break, it bends. It doesn't break for people like us." "And what about her?" Jake asked, the image of Chloe sleeping in his truck flashing in his mind. Detective Cruz's jaw tightened. "I can't answer that. My advice is to go home, be a hero, let it go." But he couldn't. The document had made it real. That night he made a decision. If the system was corrupt, he would go around it. If he couldn't trust the authorities, he would find someone the authorities couldn't control. He remembered a name from the flurry of early media calls, an investigative journalist from a major metropolitan paper who had left a voicemail that sounded genuinely curious, not just hungry for a soundbite. Lena Reyes. He dug out the number and called. He said 3 sentences. "My name is Jake Mitchell. The story about the blizzard is a lie. The truth is much worse, and I have proof." 2 days later, Lena Reyes was sitting in his living room. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and she listened without interruption for an hour as he told her everything. The real story of the night, the fake name, the secret phone, Dryden's visit and threats, the leaked report. He showed her the document. She examined it, took pictures with her own phone, and asked precise, devastating questions. When he finished, she was quiet. "This isn't a feel-good story," she said. "This is a story about abuse of power, a compromised protective detail, and a potential criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice. If we publish this, your life will be torn apart. They will come for you. Are you prepared for that?" Jake looked at a photograph of his son on the mantle. He thought of Alina's hand, so cold in his, and the way she'd flinched from her husband's touch. "I'm not prepared," he said, "but I can't be silent anymore." Lena's investigation was a silent bomb ticking away. She worked sources, cross-referenced the leaked report with other whispers, dug into the backgrounds of the security detail members present that day. Jake tried to live a normal life, but the tension was a constant hum. Dryden called once more, his voice icy. "We are hearing noises, Mr. Mitchell, unwise noises. Remember our discussion." Then the first real counterstroke hit. It wasn't directed at Jake. It was directed at his credibility. A story appeared in a pro-administration blog. "Blizzard hero has history of financial trouble." It detailed an old lien on his house, a maxed-out credit card from years ago. The insinuation was clear. He was a man in need of money, angling for a bigger payout. The comments seethed with new venom. Grifter. Exploiting a tragedy. He realized their strategy. They weren't going to threaten him directly. They were going to dismantle him in public, piece by piece, so that when he spoke, no one would listen. Lena called him, her voice tense with excitement. "I found her," she said. "The neighbor who made the original welfare call 6 months ago. She's scared, but she's willing to talk. And she has more. She heard arguments. She saw things. This is the corroboration we need." They arranged a secret meeting for the following night. This was it, the testimony that could break the wall of silence. Jake felt a grim sense of resolve. He dropped Ben off at his sister, telling her he had a late work meeting. He drove to the rendezvous point, a quiet park-and-ride lot. He was 10 minutes early. He saw Lena's car parked under a flickering streetlight. He pulled in beside it. The lot was deserted. He got out, expecting to see her. Instead, the doors of a dark sedan parked in the shadows flew open. 2 men in suits, not the same ones from the blizzard, but cut from the same cloth. emerged and walked toward him with purposeful strides. Not Agent Miller, these were new. "Jake Mitchell," the lead one said, flashing a badge too quickly to see. "You need to come with us, now." "On what grounds? Where's Lena Reyes?" "Ms. Reyes has been detained for questioning regarding the solicitation and possession of classified state security documents. That document you gave her, it's a felony to leak it, and it's a felony to possess it. You're in a world of trouble, sir. Get in the car." They hadn't just been watching him, they'd been watching her, and they had moved first. The fortress wasn't just defending itself, it was launching an attack. As one of the men took his arm, Jake knew the carefully balanced game was over. The silent pressure was gone. Now the real battle was beginning, and he was being taken right into the heart of the fortress, unarmed and outmatched. They didn't take him to a police station. They drove him to a nondescript government annex on the outskirts of the capital, a building with mirrored windows and a silent, tense atmosphere. The room they put him in was cold, windowless, and smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. The two men, who finally identified themselves as investigators from the State Inspector General's office, began a relentless circular interrogation. Their goal wasn't to learn, it was to exhaust and entrap. They circled the leaked document, trying to get Jake to admit he'd solicited it, that he'd conspired with Lena Reyes to steal state secrets, that his motive was extortion. For hours, Jake held one line: "I received it anonymously. I believed it showed a crime. I took it to a journalist because I was told the police couldn't act." He was a broken record. His fear had burned away, leaving a hard, clear anger. They threatened him with felony charges, with the loss of his son, with financial ruin. He just repeated his line. What he didn't know was that his arrest, his disappearance, was the spark that blew the story wide open. Lena Reyes, a veteran journalist with a strong reputation, had not gone quietly. Before the meeting, she had filed a preliminary story with her editors and uploaded the scanned incident report to a secure server. When she was detained, her newsroom's lawyers moved immediately, screaming to every court and every other news outlet about a blatant attack on the press. The story of the hero's arrest and the journalist's detention broke at midnight. By morning, it was a wildfire. The tidy Good Samaritan narrative collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Why was the hero in custody? Why was a journalist being held? What was in the document they were all trying to suppress? Other news organizations, now armed with the leaked report's contents, began their own digging. The neighbor Lena had found, a retired nurse named Miriam, gave a tearful, brave interview on national television, describing the screams she'd heard, the broken window she'd seen, the bruised arm Elena had tried to hide. The fortress began to crack from the inside. Detective Valerie Cruz, seeing the news and the direction the wind was blowing, went to her superiors with a formal complaint about the obstruction of the initial welfare check. Then, a low-level aide from the Protective Services detail, burdened by his conscience, contacted a reporter. He confirmed the altered logs, the pressure to downplay incidents, the culture of silence. The story was no longer about a blizzard rescue. It was about a systemic cover-up of spousal abuse at the highest level of state government. Jake was released on the evening of the second day, without charges, into a media circus. The Inspector General's office, facing a blistering lawsuit from Lena's paper and a looming federal investigation, cut him loose with a terse statement about a misunderstanding. He walked out of the annex into a barrage of camera flashes, a changed man in a changed world. The political and legal avalanche that followed was swift and brutal. A bipartisan panel in the state legislature launched an investigation with subpoena power. The Federal Department of Justice opened a civil rights inquiry. Governor Thorne, initially defiant, giving a press conference where he called the allegations a politically motivated witch hunt, saw his support evaporate. Party leaders, fearing the down-ballot collapse, privately urged him to resign. The most damning blow came from within his own home. 1 week after Jake's release, Elena Thorne, through her own newly retained lawyer, filed for divorce and requested a permanent restraining order. The court filing was a harrowing, detailed affidavit. It described years of psychological abuse, escalating control, and physical intimidation, corroborated by dates, witnesses, and previously suppressed medical records. She stated that the blizzard had been her desperate, failed attempt to flee with her daughter to a women's shelter in another state using a burner phone and cash. Her state-issued phone had a tracker. When it died in the cold, she was truly lost, both literally and figuratively. She also did one more thing. In a separate televised statement, she looked directly into the camera and said, "To the man who showed my daughter and me kindness in our darkest hour, without condition and without judgment, I owe a debt I can never repay. He saw the truth when he had every reason to believe a lie. He is the reason we are safe now." With that, the last pillar of the governor's defense crumbled. Facing impeachment, criminal investigation for obstruction and witness intimidation, and the complete collapse of his family and career, William Thorne resigned 48 hours later. The legal proceedings against him would grind on for years, but his power was gone. For Jake, the aftermath was quieter but profound. He was a hero again, but the definition had changed. He was now the man who had stood up. The smear campaign against him was exposed and discredited. His job welcomed him back with an awkward apology. The flood of media requests eventually slowed to a trickle. He received a formal, public apology from the acting governor's office and a settlement from the state for his wrongful detention, which he put into a college fund for Ben. But the most significant change was invisible. The low hum of worry that had lived in him since the blizzard, the fear of the knock on the door, the ring of the phone, slowly faded. He had stared into the gears of power and they had not crushed him. He slept through the night again. He never saw Alina again in person. He didn't need to. He followed her story in the news as she moved out of state with Chloe, as she advocated for domestic violence survivors, as she slowly rebuilt a life defined by her own strength, not her title. He felt a quiet, deep satisfaction in that. The surprising final piece of the puzzle arrived in a simple, handwritten letter, postmarked from out of state, 6 months after the resignation. The handwriting was elegant and precise. "Dear Jake," it read, "I know you never wanted thanks, but I have to give them. You gave us more than shelter. You gave me a reference point for decency. That night when you described your son with such love, it reminded me of the world I was trying to reach. The phone I had was a lifeline. When it died, I thought it was over. But your kindness was a different kind of signal. It got through. I am forever grateful. I hope your life is quiet and full of the warmth you offered us. With respect, Alina." Enclosed with the letter was a small, polished stone, smooth and warm to the touch. A paperclip held a tiny note to it. In a child's scrawl, it read, "For the man who shared his soup. Love, Chloe." Jake kept the stone on his windowsill where the morning sun would hit it. It was a small, solid thing, a paperweight for the memory of a storm that had upended everything and the unexpected calm that followed. The blizzard had been a wall of white, erasing all roads and landmarks. In its aftermath, the paths that became clear were not the ones anyone had expected. A governor fell, a woman found her freedom, and a man who thought he was just trying to get home discovered that sometimes the right thing to do is also the most dangerous and the most revolutionary thing of all. His truck was eventually returned to him, cleaned and detailed, a faint ghost of the crisis erased from its interior. One afternoon, with Ben in the passenger seat, he drove past the stretch of road where he'd been stranded. The drift was long gone. The field was green. It was just a road again. But he knew, and his son would one day know, that the ground beneath them held the memory of a night when the world stopped and everything changed. So what remains after the storm clears, the headlines fade, and the political scandals are filed away in archives? This story was never really about a governor or a rescue or even a conspiracy. It was about a simple, devastating breach in the wall that separates our private lives from our public selves. In the blinding neutrality of a blizzard, all masks froze and fell away. A powerful man's carefully constructed image shattered, revealing the cruelty it was built to hide. A woman's private terror became a public catalyst for change, and an ordinary man, by refusing to look away from a stranger's pain, found himself on a collision course with the machinery of the state. We like to believe that power is a complex equation, a game of influence and policy. But sometimes, power is just the permission to be cruel in private, backed by the assumption that no one will ever dare to speak. Jake Mitchell's power was of a different kind. It was the power of noticing, the power of asking, "What if that were my family?" It was the radical, subversive power of basic decency, which, as it turns out, can be the most destabilizing force of all. The system bent, and in places it broke, not because of a political opponent or a legal loophole, but because one person chose to see a human being instead of a problem, and a few others, haunted by their own consciences, chose to follow that example. The nurse who spoke up, the detective who filed the complaint, the aide who leaked the document, the journalist who wouldn't back down. They formed a chain, and the first link was a man in a truck sharing his soup. We are left then with a question that hangs in the air long after the final news report. What do we do with the truths we accidentally uncover? Do we walk past them, telling ourselves they are not our business, that the walls of power are too thick? Or do we stop? Do we make it our business? The legacy of that night on the county road isn't just a changed law or a toppled politician. It's a reminder that in a world that often feels too big and too cold, the most important things still happen in small, quiet spaces, in the cab of a truck, in a whispered conversation, in the choice to extend a hand instead of locking a door. Our humanity isn't found in the grand gestures, but in the decision to not drive past. If you found this story of hidden truths and quiet courage compelling, there are more narratives like it waiting to be uncovered. Consider subscribing for more deep dives into the moments where ordinary lives collide with extraordinary circumstances. The next story is just one click away. Thanks for watching.